injections of it. Yes? This is a Lamborghini Aventador, and today we're going to give you a bit of a different perspective on it. We're going to cover all the common problems, show you the things that tend to go wrong with them. So if you're in the market for one of these or considering buying one, stay tuned. Let's go. So specifically what we've got here today is an Aventador SV, but the Aventador story actually starts long before this car came along. It started back in 2012 when the LP700-4 came out. From there, we then got the Aventador S, then we get this, the SV. From there, we get the SVJ, and finally, making this video really quite timely, we've just got the Ultimae, which is the final Aventador that we're going to see. Now the good news is, no matter what one you're interested in, we've kept this guide relevant for them all, so stay tuned. So you may assume that the earlier cars tended to have more problems than the later ones, and you'd be right in that assumption, to be honest. There was a few additional problems to note on those earlier cars. Let's start with quite a big common one, the gearbox. Now it's important to remember that the Aventador's gearbox was actually quite revolutionary for the time. You see, at the time when the Aventador came along, pretty much every other supercar or hypercar tended to be moving towards the dual clutch setup, but the Aventador didn't. It stayed true to the single clutch. However, the time that it lost in gear changes to its rivals with those dual clutches was actually made up for by its revolutionary gearbox. You see, the way in which a typical gearbox would work is it would need to disengage one gear, move down the shifter rod, engage the next gear. However, with the Aventador, because it had two independent shifter rods, as it was disengaging one gear, the next was already spun up and ready to go. The result? Faster gear changes. So with all this new technology, the gearboxes must have worked amazing back in 2012 then? No, not quite. Lamborghini, like the rest of us, could have some teething problems that they had to work through. So first up, some of those issues were gear selection problems. So the car could sometimes get stuck in a certain gear or just refuse to engage certain gears. Either is pretty bad, as you would imagine, but the important thing to mention here is Lamborghini stuck by those cars. They continued to develop them and release software updates, and it really helped both the drivability of the cars and those gear selection problems. So on that basis, you absolutely shouldn't disregard an early LP700 car. Now what you should do, however, to make sure all those appropriate gearbox updates were carried out is take the VIN number of the car that you're looking to buy, take that along to Lamborghini, and they can check that that car has had the sufficient amount of gearbox and other upgrades that it should have had. So next up, another important point between those 2012 and 2013 onwards cars. But before we get there, a quick favour to ask from you guys. We make these buyer's guides for every type of car. Whether it's like this or a Ford Fiesta, we've got you covered. So please do hit that subscribe button. And if you're enjoying the video, give it a like as well. Additionally, this car has been very kindly supplied to us today by this guy here. I'm going to add his Instagram in underneath. Go off and give it a follow. This car is very active all over Scotland, so make sure you watch what he's up to. I got too into that, I didn't open the door. We'll keep that for the next one. About that 2012 to 2013 transition, one thing you really want to be aware of there is Lamborghini actually changed the ECUs that were used in these cars from 2012 to 2013. What does that mean for you? Well, it means the 2012 cars weren't necessarily able to get all the updates that Lamborghini released for the 2013 onwards. There was a host of new features added, stop, start and such. However, not a deal breaker, just be aware of it. Now stay tuned, because we're going to get the car out on the road for a rip just shortly, so make sure you see that. But before we get to it, one final check for you here. Now hopefully when you view the car, it's on a floor maybe similar to what you see in the other videos in our garage here, because that takes no prisoners. You're going to notice any leaks. Now what I'm talking about specifically here was one of the little seals that Lamborghini fitted in, again, the early LP cars gearbox. It would perish, start to leak, and a few gearboxes actually failed as a result of this. So have a look under the car, look for any fluids, but specifically look for gearbox fluids as well. Next up, let's talk about clutches, because we've become so accustomed to these modern dual clutch transmissions wherein they never really seem to wear out. However, remember, Aventador, we're going to be on that single clutch setup, so it is going to wear over time. So what can you do about it? Well, you can take the car to Lamborghini, who can perform the test on it, which will measure the clutch wear. A brand new Aventador clutch is 6mm, and basically you subtract off whatever the wear has been. Now the question that always comes up after that is, well, how long is a clutch going to last? Impossible to say. It depends on the driver, depends how the car's been treated, has it been launched, has it been tracked, and so on. I've seen them wear out as quick as 12,000 miles and seen some last over 35,000 miles. So there's your range. Next up, let's talk suspension. So thankfully, and I'm really happy to say this, there's not much to note here. Not much goes wrong. There is one thing to make you aware of, but I'm going to tell you about that once we hit the road. It's easier to tell you about once we're actually moving. Now from the suspension, let's talk consumables, and oh boy, we've reached the tippy top when it comes to expense of consumables. We're talking 355 section 21-inch tyres. They're not going to be cheap. I don't know the exact price. I don't know if I want to know the exact price. And when it comes to the brakes, obviously being carbon ceramic, wow, they're going to be real expensive to replace. What I'm getting at here is if you make sure to check all this stuff, you could literally save yourself tens of thousands of pounds. Now, one thing to bear in mind, these carbon discs, they wear differently from your typical steel discs. Steel discs, we tend to get that lip around the edge and we know they're worn. Carbon ceramic discs, they'll delaminate first and start to look rough in texture. These should be smooth as glass, and if you're seeing them as being rough, then they're probably getting ready for replacement, so make sure you check. Next up, not a massive problem, but these iconic V12 Lambo doors, well, they can sometimes squeak. These ones aren't too bad, actually. I think it's more so in hotter climates, but they can be a bit squeaky. You can lubricate them up, but it's probably just gonna come back again. So as I say, not a huge problem, but more so just something to keep in mind. Now, as we get in here, ready to get out on the road, one last thing to tell you about. There was a starter problem on these Aventadors, and what it related to was the solenoid actually inside the starter motor. Let me explain to you how it occurred. You're out, nice summer's day like we've got today, you maybe stop for fuel, you put your fuel in, try and restart the car, and nothing happens. What's going on there is heat soak has gotten into that starter, stopped the solenoid from working, and the car doesn't start. How is it resolved? Well, by removing that solenoid, adding in some heat-proof grease and reassembling it, then that would take care of the problem. Easy to say, massive labour bill, so you can test this by taking the car that you're looking at a test drive, park it up, wait 5-10 minutes, and make sure it restarts once again. Now, as for the rest of the issues, let's hit the road. I've been looking forward to this. So here we are, undoubtedly on the bit that you've been waiting for, getting the car out on a test drive, seeing how it feels to you. So a couple of things to make sure of, and apologies if this is a slightly lower quality camera. We've sacrificed the good camera to get the outside shots for you today. We thought that was the best thing to do. So number one, before we get on the road here and it's too loud and you can't hear me, listen out for any suspension knocks, particularly coming from the front. There was a suspension arm, and again, this tended more to be the early cars, but there was a suspension arm which was under tightened from the factory, and you're going to hear that knocking. If you do have that problem, take it into Lamborghini and they will put it right for you. Next up, hopefully your test drive is going to implement some stop starts so you can get a feel of that clutch. make sure it's not too juddery for you. Again, this is something that Lamborghini can adjust, so if you are finding it's a bit juddery off the line, they can adjust it for you and hopefully smooth that out a little bit. Now the final thing that I'd like to add in is when you return from this test drive, try the door handles a couple of times. There's been a few failures wherein people can't get out, so don't just get out the once, try that door a couple of times. I don't usually do this, I don't give you my take on the car, but I need to make an exception today because this is just unbelievable. It's not just the performance, it's the noise, the drama, that single clutch. So, the Lamborghini Aventador, how does it score on a reliability leaderboard? Well, it's a dream, isn't it? If this was based on how much I want one and sheer desirability, it's going to be an 11, maybe a 12 out of 10. But as you know, everything on this channel is based on reliability alone. So on that note, how does it score? Well, it actually is one of the most, if not the most reliable V12 Lamborghini flagships that we've ever seen. So on that basis, we're giving it a massive relative 7.5 out of 10. Now thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you on the next video.